"You won't be walking through that door tonight," I said calmly into the intercom, my voice steady like steel, as the rain tapped a slow rhythm against the front porch of the house I built with my own hands. The night was unusually quiet for our suburban street in Ohio, the streetlights casting long shadows over the wet pavement and reflecting off the sleek curves of my car parked at the curb. I stood inside, not at the door, watching the faint glow from the porch light illuminate the figure outside. Lauren, my wife, with Brandon, the colleague she thought she could invite freely into our home, now frozen mid-step, realizing the locks had changed. The words I had spoken earlier still lingered in the air between us, calm but irrevocable. I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to threaten. The law and proper documentation were my allies. I could see their hesitation, the subtle shift in body language as Lauren glanced back at Brandon, then down at her hands gripping the doorframe. In that instant, the years of routine, trust, and silent understanding we had shared flashed before my mind. The mundane dinners, weekend projects, early mornings at the garage, each memory threaded into the walls of this house. I could recall the first time I installed these locks, how precise each mechanism was, how I had tested every sensor, every keypad, ensuring the house was not only secure but responsive to the slightest change in access. And now, that very system had become a silent witness, recording every step they had taken in my absence, time-stamped and untouchable, a ledger of their choices. I remembered driving home earlier that week, noticing the subtle changes in Lauren's behavior, the whispered phone calls, the unexplained detours, the way she would laugh a little too loud when glancing at her watch. None of it screamed betrayal, not yet, but it was enough for a man trained to observe to begin assembling the puzzle. By the time I returned that night, the picture had clarified. The locks, the codes, the cameras, they were ready to protect what was legally mine. And standing there, hearing the drizzle on the roof, I felt a strange calm, a quiet satisfaction that no one outside would notice. But inside, the scales of control had shifted. I didn't hurry to confront them, didn't call, didn't text. Instead, I let the quiet do its work, letting each second stretch, building the tension, the anticipation, until their return would reveal the truth they hadn't anticipated. The porch light flickered as I adjusted the intercom, checking the feed from the back cameras, confirming that every entry point was monitored, every access recorded, and that no improvisation on their part could undo the preparation. In the back of my mind, I recalled the conversation with my attorney, the careful steps to ensure that every action I took would be fully compliant with the law, leaving no room for misinterpretation or false claims. The preparation itself had a rhythm, a precision that matched the steady beat of my pulse, not hurried, not reckless, controlled. I could hear Lauren mutter, a short, sharp breath as she realized the keys in her pocket no longer unlocked the door, and the click of Brandon's heels stepping back, uncertain. The moment was electric, charged with the energy of inevitability, and yet I remained calm, the calmness deliberate, like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to strike its first note. Every detail had been accounted for, the legal notices taped inside the mailbox, the change logs for every smart lock, the timestamped notifications sent to my phone. The night air smelled of wet asphalt and pine, a familiar scent that reminded me that some things, at least, remained unchanged. The sight of them standing outside, unsure, reminded me that control is rarely about force. It is about preparation, foresight, and patience. And so I waited, letting the house hold its breath, letting them feel the shift before they could act, knowing that the first words spoken in that silence would carry the weight of every choice they had made leading up to this moment, a quiet but unmistakable statement. What they had thought they could do in my absence was no longer possible, and the law, the careful planning, and the house itself were on my side, ready to uphold the boundary I had long considered sacred. 36 hours before Lauren stood in the rain with a useless key in her hand. I came home early because a client in Columbus canceled a security consultation at the last minute. It was supposed to be a simple Thursday, the kind that disappears without leaving a mark, the kind where a man drives through late afternoon traffic, stops for gas, thinks about mowing the lawn on Saturday, and wonders if there is enough coffee left for the morning. I remember the sky being flat and gray, the air smelling like wet leaves and exhaust, and the dashboard clock reading 4:27 when I turned into our subdivision. Nothing about the street looked different. The basketball hoop across from the Miller's driveway still leaned a little to the left. The same golden retriever barked behind the fence 2 houses down. The same American flag snapped softly from our porch column. Normal is dangerous that way. It lets betrayal stand in plain sight without raising its hand. I slowed as I reached our driveway, and that was when I saw the black Range Rover parked half a block away, not in front of our house, but close enough to belong to someone who did not want to be noticed. I recognized it before I wanted to. Brandon Cole drove that car like it was part of his personality, polished, loud, expensive in a way that begged people to look twice. Lauren had mentioned him often enough for his name to have a shape in my mind. Brandon from the office. Brandon who knew a great steakhouse downtown. Brandon who could close a property deal in one phone call. Brandon who, according to Lauren, was harmless. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, engine idling, the heat blowing against my knuckles, and for a few seconds I did what every husband does when the first clean fact arrives. I tried to explain it away. Maybe he was meeting someone nearby. Maybe Lauren had a work emergency. Maybe I was becoming the kind of man I never wanted to be, suspicious over a parked car and a name. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from the front door camera. Motion detected. I looked down, and the screen showed Brandon walking up my front steps with the confidence of a man who had done it before. He did not knock right away. He adjusted his jacket, checked his reflection in the glass beside the door, and smiled. That smile was the first thing that felt personal. A second later, Lauren opened the door wearing the soft blue sweater I bought her in Nashville 2 winters earlier, the one she said made her feel safe. She looked past him toward the street, quick and careful. Then she pulled him inside. I did not move. The engine kept humming. A delivery truck rolled past. Somewhere, a garage door opened. Life continued around me with cruel politeness. I should have walked in. That is what people imagine they would do. They imagine the confrontation, the raised voice, the dramatic moment where truth has nowhere to hide. But I spent 18 years designing security systems, and security teaches a man one thing above all else. When an alarm goes off, you do not run blindly into the building. You read the panel first. I drove past my own house, turned at the corner, and parked by the small retention pond at the end of the neighborhood. My hands were steady, but not because I was calm. They were steady because something inside me had gone cold enough to hold still. I opened the security app and checked the cameras installed in the common areas, all visible, all disclosed, all part of the system Lauren had signed off on when I upgraded the house 3 years earlier. The living room feed loaded first. There they were. Brandon stood near the fireplace, looking around at the walls, the furniture, the framed photographs, my life arranged behind him like a set built for his convenience. Lauren moved close enough to speak softly, but the room microphone picked up her voice clearly. She said, "He will not be home until after midnight." Brandon laughed and answered, "Your husband really trusts you." Lauren smiled in a way I had not seen directed at me in years and said, "That is what makes this easy." I watched those words land in my chest without making a sound. Not because they were the worst thing she could have said, but because they were so casual. Betrayal does not always arrive dressed like a tragedy. Sometimes it walks through your front door, compliments the fireplace, and speaks in a normal, indoor voice. I set the phone down on the passenger seat and stared through the windshield at the pond, where the wind was pushing little ripples across the water. 14 years of marriage did not break in one loud crash. It folded quietly, like a letter being placed into an envelope. I thought of the first night Lauren and I moved into that house. We ate pepperoni pizza on the floor because the dining table had not arrived, and she laughed when I used a cardboard box as a plate. She had walked from room to room barefoot, touching the empty walls, planning paint colors, curtains, a future. Back then she said the house felt like a promise. I believed her. I believed a lot of things because believing them made the work easier. The overtime, the repairs, the mortgage payments, the weekends spent replacing fence boards instead of sleeping in. A man can carry a heavy load for a long time if he thinks someone is walking beside him. But sitting in that car with the security feed glowing beside me, I understood I had been carrying more than I knew. My phone buzzed again. Living room motion. Kitchen motion. Back hallway motion. Every alert was a small, polite bell announcing another piece of my life being mishandled. I opened a new folder in cloud storage and named it House File. Not divorce. Not betrayal. Not Lauren. House File. The name mattered. Names keep emotions from spilling into places where facts need to stand clean. I saved the clips, exported the timestamps, backed them up twice, and forwarded copies to an email account Lauren did not know existed. My thumb hovered over her contact for a moment. I wanted to call. I wanted to hear her lie in real time. I wanted the small satisfaction of making her panic. But satisfaction is expensive when you buy it too early. So I did nothing. I sat there until the sky darkened, watching the house from a distance while the lights inside came on one by one. The porch light. The kitchen light. The warm living room lamp we bought together at a flea market outside Dayton. From the outside, it still looked like home. From where I sat, it looked like evidence. Inside the house, the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. That contrasted with the ongoing motion outside. I sat in my home office, the soft glow of the computer screen reflecting off the polished hardwood floors. The folder I had created labeled clearly as House File open and organized meticulously. Every video clip, every motion alert, every time-stamped entry from the smart locks had been logged and backed up in multiple secure locations. I checked each feed carefully, noting the angle, the lighting, and any movement that could be interpreted as suspicious. It was not suspicion for the sake of jealousy. It was documentation, a methodical process to ensure that truth had a record. The cameras in the living room captured Brandon walking across the room with a casual ease, laughing softly at something Lauren said, her voice carrying over the microphone with the familiar cadence I remembered from years of quiet mornings and late nights. The way she would hum while folding laundry, the way she once smiled at the simplest gesture of my attention. Now, the smile was different, directed elsewhere, unaware or perhaps indifferent to the fact that it was being recorded, that every nuance would become a piece of the puzzle later. I paused the feed for a moment to zoom in on the hallway where the security sensors tracked their steps, the soft tapping of Brandon's shoes against the hardwood floor echoing in my headphones. It was precise, almost theatrical, the way people moved when they thought they were unobserved, the little habits that give away confidence and entitlement. Lauren gestured toward the bookshelf, rearranging a few items that had once meant something to both of us. Insignificant perhaps to her now, but each action a note in the symphony of evidence I was quietly compiling. I thought about the times she had expressed disdain subtly, the way she would comment on my routines as mundane, the little jokes that carried an edge, the comparisons to colleagues who seemed more exciting in her eyes. They were not loud, but they were present, and now the camera confirmed what intuition had suspected. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a brief moment of reflection, remembering the early days of our marriage when communication was straightforward, when trust was implicit, when the walls echoed with laughter rather than calculation. I could feel the weight of the contrast, the years that had passed, and the subtle erosion of mutual respect, how a few minutes of casual conversation and laughter could undermine a decade of shared life. But I was not reacting in anger. I was preparing in quiet, deliberate steps, honoring the principle that observation and patience outweigh immediate action in situations where precision matters. The intercom notification blinked, indicating that the front door had detected new motion. I switched to the feed and watched as Lauren and Brandon moved toward the foyer, unaware that their access points had already been scheduled for a lock change later that evening under the lawful notice I had filed with our property attorney. Every step, every gesture, every casual glance was being recorded and time-stamped, forming a coherent narrative that did not require embellishment or dramatization. I noted the patterns, the timing, the interactions, cataloging them with descriptive tags to ensure clarity when presenting the findings. Outside, the rain began to fall more steadily, a rhythmic backdrop to the unfolding scene, reflecting off the driveway and the sleek surfaces of the cars parked in the lot, providing contrast and context to the warm interior that now felt more like a controlled environment than a home. I thought about the implications of what I was observing, the legal framework that supported the actions I had planned, the procedural steps that would make the upcoming changes unassailable. Every element was considered: notification, documentation, access rights, and the sequence of execution. There was no rush, no need for confrontation. The unfolding reality was already set to create clarity without escalation, a precise demonstration of control and adherence to law. I returned to the video feed, watching Lauren straighten a picture frame, Brandon adjusting his jacket, the subtle movements of everyday behavior now significant in the context of preparation and evidence gathering. I allowed myself a measured breath, feeling the satisfaction that comes from order and method, from watching time and events unfold in accordance with plan, understanding that the evening would culminate in a simple, inevitable shift of access and authority, without spectacle or excess, guided entirely by the rules and documentation I had established. The lights inside the house glimmered softly against the walls, and the intercom remained silent except for the occasional click, a reminder that the house itself, the very structure we had lived in together, was now a participant in the narrative, a witness to intentions and actions that were deliberate, lawful, and undeniable. I remained still, observing, cataloging, and preparing for the final steps that would align with every principle and precaution I had laid down, ensuring that when the moment came, it would not be about drama, but about clarity, precision, and controlled resolution. The evening had deepened, the sky over the Ohio suburb turning a rich shade of indigo as the streetlights flickered to life, casting pools of soft yellow across the wet asphalt. I remained seated in the parked car near the retention pond, the house file open on the dashboard, every clip ready for review, every timestamp aligned perfectly with the motion sensors. The air smelled faintly of rain and pine, and the distant sound of a lawn sprinkler, still running from earlier in the day, created a surreal calm that contrasted sharply with the tension unfolding inside the house. I thought about the routines we had built over the years, the way Lauren used to greet me at the door after a long day, her smile lighting the entrance, the small rituals of family dinners, folding laundry together, planning vacations, the quiet evenings where she would sit near the window reading while I repaired a faucet or checked the furnace. Those memories had become a backdrop to the present, a reminder of how subtle the erosion of trust can be when attention is diverted, when small changes in behavior go unnoticed until they are observed through a lens of scrutiny. I zoomed in on the living room camera feed, noticing the slight shift in the placement of the furniture, the angle of a photograph on the mantel, the way Lauren moved with a fluid confidence that seemed rehearsed, as if she had anticipated being observed, though not by the sophisticated network I had installed. Brandon lingered near the bookshelf, idly flipping through a book, glancing toward the door, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as if he were fully aware of the audacity of his presence. Lauren laughed softly, the sound crisp through the microphone, and I could hear the cadence of her words, familiar yet dissonant in this context. He will not come home until late. We have time. The choice of words, casual in tone, resonated like a bell, marking a decision, a confidence that was misplaced. I noted each movement meticulously, labeling clips, logging times, verifying the clarity of each recording, ensuring that if ever these files were referenced, they would tell the story without embellishment, without conjecture, only fact. I reviewed the footage from the kitchen camera, seeing the subtle gestures, Brandon reaching for a glass, setting it down, Lauren adjusting the curtain to let in just enough light from the hallway fixture, a small act that in another life would have been inconsequential, but in this narrative became evidence, context, a thread in the chain of observation. I thought about the spatial awareness required, the angles I had chosen when placing the sensors, the fact that no movement went untracked, every entry point monitored, every door, window, and common space covered. I considered the implications of my decisions, the legal structure underpinning the ownership of the house, the paperwork prepared in advance, ensuring that when action was taken, it would be entirely within the bounds of law, leaving no room for misinterpretation or false claims. The intercom chimed softly, motion detected in the rear hallway, and I switched to that feed, watching as Brandon moved toward the staircase, Lauren following, gesturing toward a framed photograph of our early years together. The juxtaposition of their casual demeanor against the precise recording system was stark, each step they took unknowingly adding to the clarity of the documentation. I recalled the conversation with my attorney. Earlier in the week, the steps required to lawfully change access, the notices, the scheduling, every detail methodically planned to ensure compliance, to remove emotion from the equation and leave only consequence. The rain intensified, tapping on the car roof, punctuating the moment, and I allowed myself a measured breath, appreciating the clarity of the situation, the certainty that comes from preparation and adherence to principle. Each clip saved, each motion noted, each annotation added, and yet I remained seated, still, calm, observing the unfolding events like a man watching a chessboard, knowing that the moves being made by the pieces on the board would soon intersect with the strategy laid out meticulously, a convergence that required patience, precision, and restraint. Outside, the night air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and pine, and through the windshield, I could see the soft glow of the porch light against the front door, the angle perfect to catch any approach, any hesitation, any sign of awareness. The house itself seemed alive, a participant in the observation, holding its breath, waiting for the resolution that had been prepared quietly, methodically, and without spectacle. In that quiet observation, I found focus, the satisfaction that comes from the convergence of planning, evidence, and legal preparedness, knowing that the evening would unfold exactly as intended, clarity arriving not through confrontation, but through deliberate, controlled execution. The living room camera feed glowed softly on the screen, the dim light of the house blending with the reflections of the rainy night outside. I leaned back slightly in the office chair, my hands resting on the leather armrests, and let my mind trace the paths I had laid, the sequences of movements that were already mapped and recorded in the house file. Every door, every hallway, every common space had been cataloged, and every step taken by Lauren and Brandon had been noted with precision. The air was cool inside, carrying the faint aroma of coffee that had been brewed earlier in the evening, mingling with the scent of polished wood and the subtle musk of wet fabric from the entryway. I recalled the early days of the marriage when routine was simple, and we would spend evenings together in that very room, discussing bills, work, or the trivialities of the week, our laughter echoing faintly against the walls. The contrast was striking now, observing the same space filled with the casual intrusion of another man, the voice of my wife carrying through the microphones as she spoke freely, unaware that each word was being logged. Brandon moved toward the sofa, his gestures fluid, confident, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the details as though he owned a familiarity that did not exist. Lauren followed, adjusting a cushion on the chair, glancing at the photographs along the mantelpiece, the images capturing moments we had once shared, vacations in the Smoky Mountains, birthdays with friends, quiet nights spent watching the snow fall outside the bay window. These details, mundane and ordinary, were now evidence, points in a timeline that I had meticulously constructed. I adjusted the view on the tablet, checking the angles from the rear cameras, confirming that the entire floor plan was under observation, every possible route recorded and cross-referenced with previous entries. The lighting changed slightly as a car passed on the street, its headlights cutting across the window panes, revealing the faint reflection of Brandon's face and the subtle tension that flickered for a moment before he turned away. Lauren laughed softly at something he said, the sound clear and unmodulated, betraying no awareness of the observation. I paused the clip, noting the time, the position of each person, and labeled it with a precise descriptor to ensure clarity later. There was no rush, no need for an immediate reaction, only the steady collection of facts, the creation of a record that would serve as an unalterable narrative. My mind revisited the conversation with my attorney from earlier in the week, the careful review of property rights, occupancy agreements, and the procedural steps required to ensure that any changes I would make were lawful, leaving no room for dispute. Each consideration reinforced the strategy, highlighting the importance of patience, control, and methodical execution. I took a sip from the coffee mug beside me, the warmth grounding me, as I reviewed the feed of the foyer, noting the angle of the light, the direction of movement, the way Lauren adjusted her stance when reaching for the doorknob. Every minor gesture was captured, a building block in the house file that chronicled the unfolding reality without exaggeration. The rain intensified outside, the steady tapping against the windows forming a rhythm that paralleled the quiet pulse of the evening, emphasizing the stillness, the anticipation, and the inevitability of what was planned. I reminded myself of the importance of maintaining composure, the principle that observation without action is a form of control, that measured restraint often speaks louder than impulsive confrontation. The house itself seemed to embrace the night, holding its breath, its walls quietly observing the interactions within, a silent participant in the narrative I had constructed. I opened a secondary folder to cross-reference previous recordings, aligning timestamps, verifying consistency, and ensuring that every piece of data supported a coherent sequence. Each entry was precise, descriptive, and ready to present if needed, forming a complete account of the activity without the intrusion of emotion or bias. As I monitored the feeds, I could see subtle patterns emerge. The way Brandon shifted weight from one foot to the other, the timing of Lauren's glances toward the hallway, the alignment of objects on tables and shelves. These small details, seemingly inconsequential, contributed to the overall picture, confirming assumptions and validating the strategy. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, considering the years spent constructing the home, the care taken in every choice of material, placement of sensors, and installation of locks. All of it now functioning exactly as intended, providing clarity, control, and a foundation for lawful action when the time came. I settled back, steadying my breathing, appreciating the methodical progression of the evening, knowing that preparation and observation would culminate in a resolution that required no dramatics. Only precision, patience, and adherence to the careful plan I had established, each recorded movement a testament to the structured approach that would soon define the turning point of this chapter. By 7:30 that evening, the house had given me enough truth to stop wondering and start moving. I closed the camera feed, saved the latest set of clips into the house file, and drove away from the retention pond without looking back at the windows glowing behind me. The rain had slowed to a mist, soft enough to blur the windshield but not enough to hide the road, and I remember the wipers moving in a steady rhythm like a metronome, keeping time for a life I no longer recognized. I did not drive home. I drove downtown to a brick building on West Broad Street where my attorney, Marcus Reed, kept a small office above a title company and a coffee shop that closed at 5. Marcus was not the kind of lawyer who wore flashy suits or made loud promises. He was a careful man with tired eyes, gray at the temples, and a way of listening that made silence feel useful. I had met him years earlier when I expanded my security business and needed contracts written clean enough to survive difficult clients. Back then, he told me something I never forgot. Paper does not care how you feel, but it remembers what people agreed to. That sentence came back to me as I climbed the stairs with a laptop bag over my shoulder and a folder of documents under my arm. His receptionist was gone for the night, but Marcus opened the door himself, holding a mug of black coffee and looking at me like he already knew the weather inside my chest. I did not give him a speech. I did not call Lauren names. I did not ask him how to make her suffer. I set the laptop on his conference table, opened the house file, and let the evidence speak in timestamps, audio, motion logs, and video clips from common areas of a home where every camera had been disclosed and installed with household consent. Marcus watched without interrupting. The room was quiet except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the rain ticking against the office window. When Lauren said, "That is what makes this easy," Marcus looked down at his legal pad and wrote one word: pattern. When Brandon walked through the living room like a man touring something he hoped to inherit, Marcus wrote another word: access. When the smart lock records showed his entries on 3 separate dates, I had been told Lauren was working late. Marcus stopped the video, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ethan," he said, slow and careful, "this is no longer just about marriage." That sentence settled over the table heavier than anger ever could. He asked for the deed. I gave it to him. He asked for the refinance packet from 3 years earlier. I had that too. He asked for the occupancy disclosure Lauren had signed when we changed the mortgage structure after my security company took on liability insurance. I slid it across the table in a manila folder, already tabbed. For the first time that night, Marcus almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because good paperwork has a way of creating oxygen in a room that has been filling with smoke. He read for several minutes, turning pages with the slow patience of a man searching for a hinge. I watched his finger move over clauses I had barely understood when I signed them. Separate property, premarital acquisition, acknowledged waiver, limited marital claim subject to court review, Terms of lawful notice regarding access modification. My name was on the deed. My company had paid for the security upgrades. Lauren had signed the disclosure acknowledging that access could be changed under specific conditions if the property owner issued written notice and made reasonable arrangements for personal belongings. At the time, it felt like routine paperwork. Now it felt like a door I had forgotten was there. Marcus leaned back and said, "You cannot just lock someone out because you are angry. That creates problems. But you are not asking me about anger. You are asking me about lawful procedure." I nodded once. My throat felt tight, but my voice stayed even. "Tell me the procedure." He began with the basics. Written notice, third-party witness, documented delivery, inventory protections, no interference with essential personal items, no threats, no scene, no argument on the porch. If Lauren called law enforcement, I would present ownership records, occupancy paperwork, and proof of notice. If she needed belongings, arrangements would be made through counsel or a civil standby. Everything clean, everything documented. No drama for her to turn into a story where she was the victim and I was the unstable husband. Then Marcus grew quiet, and I saw the change in his face before he spoke. "There is one more thing." He turned his monitor toward me. "A filing search, a consultation record, a domestic attorney Lauren had met with in February." I stared at the screen, reading her name beside a case preparation note Marcus had obtained through a routine conflict check and public filing trail. The phrase that froze me was not divorce planning. People plan exits. People get scared. People prepare. The phrase that froze me was constructive abandonment strategy. Marcus explained it carefully. If Lauren could push me to leave the house in anger and stay away, she could claim I had walked out, abandoned the home, destabilized the marriage, and created grounds for temporary control of the residence while the divorce moved forward. Suddenly the night rearranged itself in my mind. The smirks, the carelessness, the confidence. Brandon in my living room was not just betrayal. It was bait. Lauren had not only opened the door to another man. She had been waiting for me to slam it behind myself. I sat there in that quiet office with the rain on the window and the city lights bleeding across the glass, and something inside me finally stopped hurting long enough to understand. They had mistaken my restraint for weakness. They had mistaken my routine for blindness. They had mistaken my home for a stage where I would be provoked into ruining my own case. Marcus slid a yellow legal pad toward me and tapped the top line with his pen. "From this moment on," he said, "no emotional conversations. No late-night arguments. No hallway confrontations. Everything goes through paper, witnesses, and timestamps." I looked at the house file on the laptop screen, then at the deed beside it, then at the lock change authorization form Marcus had begun drafting. For the first time all day, I felt the floor under me become level again. Not healed, not happy, just level. There is a difference, and any man who has ever had to hold himself together knows it. Healing comes later. Level is enough to stand on. I signed the first notice at 8:12 that night. The pen moved across the page without shaking. Marcus notarized it, scanned it, and placed the original in a folder marked Property Access. The words sounded cold. Maybe they were. But cold is not always cruel. Sometimes cold is what keeps the facts from catching fire. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the mist had stopped. Downtown Columbus was slick with rain, headlights stretching across the pavement in long silver lines. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. It said, "Working late again?" I looked at it for a long moment, then typed the only answer that did not give away the board. "Yes. Do not wait up." The drive home was calm, the streets slick with the evening drizzle, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt in long, stretching lines that blurred into the distance. I kept my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, listening to the soft hum of the tires on the pavement and the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windshield. The house file and deed paperwork rested on the passenger seat beside me, secured in a leather portfolio, each document meticulously organized, labeled, and ready for immediate use. I thought about the sequence I had set in motion, the way Marcus had outlined the steps to ensure absolute legal compliance. The notice served, the backup of all camera footage, timestamps cross-referenced with occupancy logs, and written documentation of every access point that had been changed or monitored. Each element built upon the last, a quiet architecture of control designed to shift the balance in a situation that had long been lopsided. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the faint reflection of my own face, calm, measured, revealing nothing of the storm that had been contained within the house file and the careful strategy that had unfolded over the past 48 hours. I remembered the early evenings spent in the living room, Lauren seated on the sofa reading, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light across the room, and the comforting rhythm of ordinary life that had once made the house feel like a sanctuary. That rhythm now contrasted sharply with the deliberate monitoring, the observation, and the legal preparation that had replaced assumption with evidence. I parked outside the quiet coffee shop near the office where I had left Marcus, the neon sign flickering above the entrance reflecting on the puddles beneath the tires. I took a moment to breathe, the cold air filling my lungs, and felt the clarity that comes from having structure and documentation firmly in place. This was not about confrontation. It was about preparedness, and the meticulous planning provided an unexpected serenity. I reviewed the house file once more on my tablet, noting the movement logs, the motion detection timestamps, and the video clips from the main floor, ensuring that everything aligned perfectly with the legal strategy Marcus had advised. Each recording was labeled with time, location, and context, forming an irrefutable record of events that could be referenced at any point. I thought about the implications of ownership and occupancy, the clauses that had seemed mundane when signed, now providing authority to act within the law without emotion clouding judgment. Driving past the familiar streets, I observed neighbors returning from errands, children playing briefly under umbrellas before heading indoors, and the distant hum of freeway traffic, all ordinary movements juxtaposed against the extraordinary clarity of my planned course of action. As I approached the driveway of our home, I kept the headlights dim, parking just out of view to maintain discretion while I reviewed one last series of entries on the tablet. The front door camera showed the porch light casting soft shadows, the reflection of the street blending with the ambient glow of the interior, and I confirmed that the schedule for the lock change was in effect, every code set, every access restriction aligned with the proper legal process. I thought about the careful sequencing, the timing of notices, and the third-party witness arrangement, each element ensuring that when the change occurred, it would be fully lawful, documented, and undeniable. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and pine, reinforcing the sense of clarity and purpose. I adjusted the tablet, viewing feeds from multiple angles to confirm the alignment of each motion detection point with the recorded access logs. The windows reflected the faint glow of the monitors, a reminder that the house itself was an instrument of evidence, silent and impartial, capturing movement and behavior without judgment or commentary. I considered the long-term implications, not just the immediate change of access, but the establishment of a documented, lawful framework that would protect both the property and the sequence of events, preventing any narrative from being twisted by assumption or emotion. The anticipation built not as a moment of anger, but as the natural outcome of meticulous planning, observation, and lawful preparation. I closed my eyes briefly, listening to the rain, the distant hum of the neighborhood, and the faint clicks of the security systems updating their logs in real time, each sound reinforcing the certainty that every step I had taken was aligned, deliberate, and unassailable. The clarity of purpose replaced any lingering tension, leaving only the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the plan is sound, the evidence secure, and the law firmly on my side, ready to support the actions that would soon define the next phase of the evening. The next morning arrived without mercy, pale and gray, the kind of Ohio morning where the sky hangs low over the roofs and everything outside looks washed in cold dishwater. I had slept for maybe 2 hours in the guest room of a small hotel off Interstate 270, not because I was hiding, but because Marcus had made one thing clear: do not return to the house until the procedure is ready, witnessed, and documented. At 6:15, my alarm rang, and I opened my eyes to a ceiling I did not recognize, feeling the strange emptiness of a man who had not lost his home, but had lost the illusion that made it feel warm. The coffee in the lobby tasted burned, the little paper cup bending slightly in my hand as I stood near the window and watched commuters pull onto the highway. Men in pickup trucks, women in compact cars, parents with travel mugs and tired eyes. Ordinary people heading into ordinary days, And there I was with a leather folder under my arm that could redraw the boundary of my entire life. By 7, I was back in Marcus Reed's office. He had already printed 3 copies of the notice, each one clipped and labeled, each page carrying language so plain it almost felt cruel. There were no insults in it, no accusations written in anger, just facts, ownership records, access modification notice, instructions for retrieving personal belongings through counsel, a statement that no essential items would be withheld, a line explaining that any dispute should be handled through attorneys or appropriate civil channels. Paper has a way of sounding heartless until you understand that heartless is sometimes the only thing that keeps people honest. Marcus read everything aloud, not for drama, but for accuracy. I listened to every word as if he were reading weather conditions before a flight. Calm, necessary, unemotional. Then he slid the final page toward me and pointed to the signature line. Once this is served, he said, you do not improvise. I signed. The pen scratched across the paper, quiet as a match being struck in another room. At 8:30, a private process server named Daniel met us in the parking lot. He was a compact man in a navy rain jacket with a clipboard tucked under his arm and the expression of someone who had seen every version of human disappointment and learned not to react to any of it. Marcus gave him the packet. I gave him Lauren's schedule as best as I knew it. At 9:10, Daniel called from outside the marketing office where Lauren worked and confirmed service. His voice was flat and professional. She accepted the envelope. She read the first page. She appeared upset but calm. I documented time and location. That was all. No cinematic explosion. No screaming in a parking lot. Just a woman standing under a glass office awning with paperwork in her hand, learning that the game she thought she was playing now had rules she had not written. 5 minutes later, my phone began vibrating. Lauren. Then Lauren again. Then a text. What is this? Another. Are you serious? Another. You cannot do this. I watched the messages appear and disappear on the lock screen, each one trying to pull me back into the emotional mud where mistakes are made. Marcus looked over his glasses and said, do not respond. So I did not. That silence cost me more than I expected. It is one thing to plan restraint in an office. It is another thing to feel your wife calling, to know her voice is on the other side of that vibration, to remember the woman who once cried at our kitchen table because she thought we would never afford a real house, and then to remember that same woman telling another man my trust made things easy. By noon, the lock company arrived at the house in a white van with blue lettering on the side. Marcus came with me, along with Daniel as witness. We parked in the driveway like men arriving for a service appointment, because that was what it was. The neighborhood was quiet. A mail truck rolled by. Someone down the block was using a leaf blower despite the damp grass. I unlocked the front door with my existing code for the last time. The keypad chirped green, and that small sound hit me harder than I expected. For years, that green light meant home. Now it meant transition. The house smelled faintly of Lauren's vanilla candle and the lemon cleaner she used when company came over. On the entry table sat a stack of mail, a pair of sunglasses, and a ceramic bowl full of keys we had collected over the years. Old car keys, spare garage keys, a tiny brass key from a suitcase we no longer owned. Domestic archaeology, proof that lives are built from small objects long before they are broken by large choices. The locksmith, a quiet woman named Renee, worked efficiently, replacing cylinders, resetting smart lock credentials, changing garage access, removing temporary guest codes, and logging each modification on a service sheet Marcus kept beside him. Every click sounded final. Not loud, not cruel, just final. Front door, back, door, garage entry, basement walkout, side gate. One by one, the house stopped answering to the old life. I walked through the rooms while they worked, not touching much, only looking. The living room where Brandon had stood. The kitchen where Lauren used to dance barefoot while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The hallway with photographs I could no longer look at directly. I stopped in front of the mantel, where a picture from our trip to Gatlinburg still sat in a wooden frame. Lauren had her arms around my waist in that photograph, smiling into the mountain air like the future was settled. I picked it up, then set it back down exactly where it had been. Evidence was not the only thing that needed preservation. Sometimes grief does too. At 2:45, Renee tested the final lock. The keypad flashed blue, then green under my new access code. She handed Marcus the completion sheet. Daniel signed as witness. Marcus signed beneath him. I signed last. My name looked strangely neat, considering what it meant. Then we placed a copy of the notice in the mailbox, another in a sealed weatherproof sleeve attached near the front entry, and a third with Marcus for the record. Lauren's calls had stopped by then, which made the silence feel less like peace and more like pressure building behind a closed valve. At 4:18, the front door camera sent a notification. Lauren's sedan pulled into the driveway. She stepped out fast, envelope in hand, hair pulled back, face tight with disbelief. She tried the old code. Red light. She tried again. Red light. Then she used her key. The deadbolt did not turn. She froze, staring at the lock like it had spoken to her in a language she suddenly understood. I stood inside with Marcus beside me, watching through the entry monitor, my voice calm because the paper was calm, because the witness was calm, because the house itself had finally stopped pretending. Lauren looked up at the camera and said my name, not softly, not lovingly, but like a demand. I pressed the intercom button and answered. Lauren, the notice has been served. Any arrangements need to go through Marcus. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. Then her expression changed, not into fear, not into sadness, but into calculation. That was when I knew she was not done. She stepped back from the porch, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I did not need audio to know who it was. 10 minutes later, Brandon's black Range Rover turned onto our street. Brandon's car slowed as it approached the driveway, the tires skimming over wet asphalt, leaving thin trails in the lingering rainwater that pooled along the curb. Lauren stayed behind, standing on the porch, the envelope still clutched in her hand, her face tight with disbelief and calculation. She looked up at the camera, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted, then down at the deadbolt that refused to turn under her key. I pressed the intercom button calmly and said, Lauren, any arrangements for your belongings will go through Marcus Reed. There was a pause, a soft inhale she could not hide even through the small speaker. Behind her, Brandon stepped out of the car, glancing toward the front door with a mixture of impatience and realization as he noticed the reinforced locks and the security camera angle catching his every move. He opened the passenger door, adjusting his jacket, and glanced at Lauren, speaking softly in a tone I could not hear, though their body language spoke volumes. She hesitated, looking back at him, then at the door again, the red indicator on the keypad blinking insistently, denying access. I could see her weighing options, calculating next moves, and it was there, in that frozen moment, that the precision of planning met the weight of their expectations. The rain pattered against the porch roof, punctuating each second of stillness, as I observed from inside the house. Marcus standing beside me with a calm, practiced eye, witnessing the execution of the strategy we had so carefully constructed. Every motion, every glance, every pause was recorded and time-stamped, forming a clear, unalterable narrative of events, ready to be presented to any authority if necessary. Brandon waved his hand toward the door, gesturing at the deadbolt, the smart lock panel, the intercom camera, all evidence of preparation that he could not override with arrogance or speed. Lauren shifted her weight, glancing around the porch, finally dropping the envelope onto the wet welcome mat, the crisp paper slightly bent from her grip, and taking a step back, realizing that the house she had treated as a stage for confidence and provocation now spoke a language she could not interpret. I did not hurry. I did not step forward. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint dripping from the gutters. Marcus observed silently, occasionally taking notes for the record. The timing was perfect. Every legal notice, every procedural step, every backup copy of the house file was in place, ensuring that the actions I was about to take would be indisputable and lawful. I could see the moment in Lauren's posture, that subtle shift from defiance to calculation to recognition of the reality she had ignored. A pattern repeated over decades when people encounter consequences they had not foreseen. Brandon gestured again, leaning slightly toward her, then looked at the front door, his mouth tightening, understanding that his confidence in the household's accessibility had been misjudged. I tapped the intercom again, voice calm, measured. Everything you need to arrange will be coordinated with Marcus. Any unauthorized access will be documented. The rain continued to mist, the soft gray sky above reflecting the tension and clarity of the moment. Lauren glanced at the car, then back at the front door, hesitated, then stepped down onto the porch carefully, pulling her coat tighter, while Brandon remained slightly behind her, his hand hovering near the doorframe. Realizing that the threshold was no longer theirs to command, I took a step back, allowing the moment to unfold with the quiet inevitability that meticulous planning allows, every motion accounted for, every step predictable, every pause purposeful. For the first time since noticing the signs, the weight of control returned to me, not through confrontation or argument, but through preparation, patience, and adherence to the law. The porch light reflected off the rain-slicked steps, casting their elongated shadows across the welcome mat, a visual testament to the transition that had occurred, quiet yet undeniable. I remained still, observing, noting, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful statement is the one made without raised voice or dramatics, the one that arrives fully formed and indisputable through order, preparation, and the silent enforcement of principles.